เป็นการแสดงปาฐกถาในหัวข้อ Looking Forward to Resilient Future ค่ะโดยการบรรยายในประเด็นแรกนะคะจะเป็นในมุมมองด้านนโยบายสาธารณะค่ะโดยรองศาสตราจารย์ซาร่าเฉียค่ะจาก National University of Singapore Business School ค่ะท่านเป็นผู้มีประสบการณ์ด้านการวางแผนนโยบายด้านการพัฒนาและ R&D ในหลากหลายภาคส่วนนะคะไม่ว่าจะเป็นภาครัฐแล้วก็องค์กรเอกชนระดับโลกค่ะรวมถึงสถาบันเทคโนโลยีในประเทศต่างๆทั้งสิงคโปร์เกาหลีใต้และอินโดนีเซียณโอกาสนี้ดิฉันขอเรียนเชิญคุณซาร่าขึ้นมาบนเวทีค่ะขอเรียนเชิญค่ะ
Well, on our second session is the lecture on the topic of looking forward to the resilient future from Professor Sarah Xie, an expert from the National University of Singapore Business School. Professor Xie will shed light on the crucial perspective of public policy in the transformation towards a resilient future. So I believe that her speech would provide a very valuable insight information. So please welcome Professor Sarah Xie.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the invitation by the organizer to this session. So today I'm going to be sharing with you about the public policy perspective using Singapore as the case study. I also want to thank the earlier speaker who helped me set the stage about what foresight is, and so that I can just jump straight into how it is being applied at a national level. Now, Singapore. Maybe before I get started, I'd like to let you know, those of you who are not familiar with Singapore, do you want to guess how big is Singapore compared to Thailand? Oh, sorry, compared to Bangkok, not Thailand, Bangkok. We are just half the size of Bangkok City, and but our population, unlike Bangkok, which is 20 million, am I right? So we have 6 million population. So 6 million population with half the size of the land, we have to constantly rationalize how we use our land, how we optimize it for industry, for livability, for resilient future as well. So today's agenda, I'm going to be covering 3 key aspects. Actually, these 3 key topics were given by Dr. Rupong, which I thought were very good, to help me structure that. So I think what I would like to share is how foresight actually support our public policy design as well as redesign. And also, how do we ensure that public policy is not outdated, is not obsolete, is not actually resistant to change, but constantly looking forward to the future. And lastly, public organizations that have been created in the past, what is their relevance? Do we still continue to keep them even if they overlap or they are no longer relevant? And what do we do in Singapore with these public organizations when the environment has changed or their mission has rendered obsolete or expanded? Now, I would like to just share about our vision, Singapore vision that was published to the public through our national newspaper for 2017. Now, this is a vision set in 2017 for the next, I think that was for 2030, right? So how do we envisage our city? Now, Singapore actually started off as a trading hub, and so back in 1970s, just after 20 years after rebuilding from World War II, I think at that time we had Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore as identified as the Asian tigers. But unlike the other 3 countries, which actually went straight into building national R&D capability, Singapore did not. Because in 1970s, Singapore was still a third world country where people were living in poverty, and the skill that we had were just a lot of barbers, right, for cutting hair. And so at that time, we didn't have any capability for R&D. Now fast forward from 70s to 90s. Right, so during this 20 years period, we worked very hard as a country to try to attract foreign direct investment, to develop capability in manufacturing. But as the manufacturing and the production work got relocated to the neighboring countries because of the lower cost, we realized that we had to keep going up. But what was really the wake-up call for Singapore at that time was the 1997 financial crisis, where we realized that no longer can we just depend on foreign direct investment and MNCs to set up shop in Singapore to provide job and grow our GDP, we needed to have homegrown technologies. And that was the time where we actually set up our own research institutes and also housed centralized the research institutes from the university as well as from the public research institutes under a national agency called A*STAR, Agency for Science and Technology Research, where I serve as a vice president for commercialization and strategic planning for about 6 years. So during that period, there are a lot of changes, right? So now given this vision, how has it changed? You know, from the time when we first started in the 70s to the 90s. Now in the 90s, our vision was actually to remain competitive in Southeast Asia and to remain relevant, right? And at that time, apart from ensuring that we set aside R&D to have our own homegrown technologies and our homegrown Oracle and Microsoft, right, or the equivalent of Oracle and Microsoft. So we decided to build our own capability. And how did we do that? So with that mission of having our own innovation-driven economic growth, we formulated our innovation policies. And these are the 3 key elements that I'd like to draw your attention to on how our innovation policies were being derived. Strategic orientation, and followed by policy coordination and policy implementation. Actually, quite a lot of research has been done in this area to identify, you know, what are the common elements that take place across different countries, across different regions, and how some countries are able to achieve, you know, more tangible and more realize certain outcome that is more closely aligned to the plan than others. Right, and we found that actually these 3 key elements, you know, make a lot of difference. Now, first is strategic orientation. Now, as mentioned earlier, that Singapore is very limited in land size, so we have to constantly rationalize what we needed to use our land for. One thing was for sure, I think in the 80s, there was a plan to actually move away from primary production. And it would instead import mostly the livestock from our neighboring countries. Actually, Thailand is one of the key suppliers to us for rice and for livestock as well. And so primary production had to go. So what we focused on are tertiary services such as financial services, and in fact we are a very service-oriented economy where 70% of our GDP came from services. So between 1991 to 2005, we had a lot of science and technology plan, which was very much prompted to build our own R&D capability, right? But after 15 years, we did some stock taking, and we found that, you know, there are some key areas that we need to focus on. Now, doing research doesn't mean that it is leading edge research, and doing leading edge research doesn't mean that it's immediately usable. We have a lot of university professors, you know, who did basic research, and their technology readiness level, if you look at it from level 1, which is very basic, to level 10, where it's immediately applicable and usable by the market. Universities tend to focus on basic research, which is within, you know, 2 to 3, and public institute research will then focus on a higher level of TRL from 4 to maybe 6. And then when it's ready to go to the market, then the private sector companies will then be able to translate them and incorporate the technologies into commercializable products and services, right? So that will be in the range of 8 to 10. Now, having a clear understanding of, you know, where the technology readiness are, we also divide up and allocate our R&D budget according to the capability of the capability as well as the function of the institutions. Meaning that academic research will just focus on basic research, public research institutes will focus on intermediate research of a higher readiness level, and then we will have then private organizations that will do that translation. So that would mean that public and private sector need to work very closely together, meaning that gone are the days where the scientist can just work in the lab and dream about, you know, what he wants to do. Because a lot of these public funds will need to be translated into tangible economic outcome, that it has to be technology that is relevant for the industry. So in fact, what that means is that even for basic research, before a scientist can write a proposal, he has to think about how is his research will eventually be commercially relevant, right? So these are the key output that is from the review, and also the kind of a strategic orientation that we have taken. So with this strategic orientation, the next thing that is very important is to enforce legitimacy. Now, it is one thing to say that you want to do something and have a vision and dream about it, but it's another to try to put things into action. So there are two things we put into action. One is to actually legislate new acts to be able to deploy national funds into R&D. So there was a National Research Fund that was set up, ring-fenced out of our national budget, just focusing on our science and technology, our research, innovation, and enterprise. So that fund was set aside by the new legislation in 2006. So first, we ensure that it's sufficient funding. Second, we need to ensure that the people who are working on it are legitimate, right? They are given the mandate, the authority, and also the governance that is in place. So in the same year, we have a RIE, Research, Innovation and Enterprise Council, that was chaired by the Prime Minister himself. And guess who sits on the council? Will be the ministers. In fact, almost all the ministries are represented at that council. It shows the level of significance, the importance that we put to this national plan. And so this kick-started the 5-year planning cycle. So in 2015, every 5 years we will set a new plan, new budget. So in 2015, we set aside $19 billion Singapore dollars for the innovation and enterprise plans. So for that budget that is being set aside, there were 4 key strategic thrusts. And these thrusts were looking at how to foster closer integration between the research institutes as well as the industry, and also to ensure the stronger dynamic and focus on value creation. And lastly, but not also the most important, is how do you optimize your manpower. Now this actually quite a busy chart, sorry about that, but I can share this later, with the organizer, who can distribute to the participants if you're interested. So here at the top level, we have a strategic orientation where the 4 key strategic thrusts, are very clearly defined at the start by the government for science and technology, right, or for innovation policy. And the governance, which is very important, are the Prime Minister and all his ministers, cabinet ministers. Next, the next level that is support the strategic orientation with the policy coordination. Now, having so many ministries in place would mean that there's a need to coordinate the policies. So this is to ensure that the budget that's being allocated, is given to the right department and for the right project type. And that again, there was legislation that was enacted to make sure that there is a proper governance body for that, and the National Research Foundation was set up, established in 2006 to oversee the use of this National Research Fund. And this National Research Foundation, being the policy coordination arm, is then chaired by the Deputy Prime Minister, and the council comprised members who are permanent secretary. That means they're one level below our ministers of each of the respective ministries. And with this, we also defined 4 technology domains, as well as 4 horizontal. Technology are the vertical domains, and 4 horizontal domains. You may ask, why are we doing this? Why do we only have 4? Because in the world, if you talk to Taiwan or Japan, they have at least 15 or 20, right? But as I mentioned earlier, we are very limited in size, resources, and manpower. So we focus on 4 key areas which we think are most strategic to Singapore, and also where we have a competitive advantage, right? So the first one is on advanced manufacturing, which is really our core engine of growth. Advanced manufacturing would include remanufacturing of circular economy to look at how we rebuild materials that are from existing products, and how do we have a way to reuse the materials, break down the materials and reuse them in a very carbon-friendly way. And the next vertical focus here, which is strategic domain, is about health and wellness, because we are an aging population, right? So and we also needed to find a way to do chronic condition management. So that requires a lot of research in precision medicine to ensure that the kind of treatment that we do can be very personalized to the person according to the Asian genome. At the same time, we also use big data to help us get insights. Now, all this is with a view to achieve better patient outcome and also to bring down the cost of our healthcare, right? And third, we are looking at urbanization and sustainability with circular economy and also the climate change challenge that we have to address. We also needed to ensure that our city is not only livable, but we are resilient for food. Now, I think at this point, I would want to highlight that food is a very important aspect for us. You may not feel that in Thailand because you are a country with abundance in agricultural production. But in Singapore, we are 90% of our food is imported. And that would mean that we are exceptionally susceptible, vulnerable to price fluctuation, to supply chain disruptions, and to inflation, food price inflation as well. And so with this, especially after COVID, pandemic disruption, we all the more accelerated the need to look at food resilience. And then lastly, we look at digital economy, and also service and digital economy to look at how to help our companies digitalize and also be competitive. So with these 4 verticals, and we also have 4 horizontals that cut across cut across the 4 vertical. Now the 4 horizontals refer to academic research, our manpower development, and also innovation and enterprise, our SMEs, our own homegrown enterprises, and lastly we have one budget that is set aside for white space. We don't know what that is, but it is a buffer that we set aside to ensure that if there are new changes or new technologies or new areas that we need to look at, like the way we have looked at COVID and the vaccination research that needed to be done, the white space fund can be deployed very quickly for that purpose. So with this second level policy coordination, right, which account for the second element, now move on to the third element, which is policy implementation. Now policy implementation here, we all know that people will not do what you expect. They will only do what you inspect, right? So how do we inspect them? We set key performance indicators, right? And so with the budget that is allocated, there are a whole suite of KPIs that the organization has to be accountable for. And so with RIE, we have research KPIs to ensure that we are on target. We measure by the number of R&D projects together with the industry, and R&D spending from the industry. Now, and also innovation and enterprise, we look at the number of licenses that public research institutes have generated from the licensing of their intellectual property, of their patents. And then we also measure by the licensing revenue, the number of spin-offs. And for talents, we track the number of scientists and engineers and PhD holders there are, right? Okay, and so this actually formed the last element, policy implementation. Basically, is about implementing the policy in the form of schemes and programs. So schemes and programs, for instance, they can be very small amount of grants that are given to the principal investigators in the universities or the public research institutes to do their PI lab research, and this can be in the range of a few $100,000 to $1 million. Now, if there are programmatic kind of grants, maybe for instance you're looking at aging population, then maybe a larger amount of grants is being set aside, where teams of researchers can work together to deploy that fund. So these are under every vertical, there are schemes and also responsible agencies responsible for inviting proposals, reviewing them, and shortlisting the promising ones and disbursing the funds, right? And also at the end of the day, reporting, how they have achieved the key performance indicators. So what I have covered is about how foresight with the vision that we have set up that is used to support, our innovation policy, our public policy, and how we have designed them. Now, the next thing that I'd like to highlight is how do we ensure that public policy is fit for the future? Because right now, as our Dr. Renee mentioned, our future is so uncertain, so volatile, so ambiguous, and so complex. So how do we constantly ensure that our public policy is fit? So this is where our annual review, our five-yearly review will take place. So for the first 15 years, from 91 to 2010, we have our National Science and Technology plans. But from 2010 onwards, we moved from Science and Technology to RIE, which stands for Research, Innovation and Enterprise, because we felt that, or the government thought that at that time there was a need to bring in the business, the industry, the commercial aspect, not just science and technology. So the planning cycle started with RIE in 2015, where 16 billion was set aside as a budget to create high-value employment and address societal challenges such as aging population and urban sustainability. So 5 years later, how do we ensure that, based on the vision that you saw in 2017, how do we achieve it and how do we adjust, in the face of COVID? I like to show this because 2017 is just before COVID and 2022, 5 years later, is after COVID. Did we achieve our plan? Did we change our plans? Did we change our policy? Now, 5 years ago, we wanted to have autonomous vehicle, where people can just drive to their work, can just get into a car without having to drive. Now, 5 years later, we actually had a couple of trials of our autonomous vehicles at our Science Park 2, to start with self-driving buses and shuttle services. And there was also the Jurong Innovation District, where we are looking at having our industrial park, a new industrial park that is highly automated intelligence with smart logistics and advanced manufacturing robotics, all housed in that district in 2017. So 5 years later, this is actually our plan, where we have already set aside attracted partners, technology partners like Siemens, Konica, Fanuc, which is the industrial robots provider. We also have our university, advanced training centers providing talent and training. R&D, our A-Story Manufacturing have set up their centers there. And factories of the future, we are very happy that Hyundai has set up their plants to manufacture electric vehicles in this innovation district. So everything is still going according to plan, right? And so we also have the renewables, photovoltaic floating panel we wanted to install, and 5 years later, these are one of the 3 energy projects that are being tested in our Jurong Island. So maybe I fast forward a bit. So we have Newtown, where now Singapore, as I mentioned earlier, we are so scarce in land, right? So how are we expanding? We are planning in the future to have a deeper underground city. So the cars, the roads, most of the roads will go underground, and factories, schools, and will also be, and warehouses as well will be going underground. So what is reserved for above ground will be is very precious livable land. It will be used for community living, right, and for walking. So going car free, and then we also have a second district. So this is 5 years later, we have a Jurong Lake district. This is our central business district. Right. Cyber security. Now our national service men all have to, all Singaporean men have to serve as a national service as a soldier, be trained as a soldier. Right, so in 2017, we decided that we should train our soldiers in cybersecurity. And 5 years later, we have NUS, my university, together with the Ministry of Defense, offer cybersecurity courses that will also train the soldiers, in the cybersecurity, so that they will be better prepared for defense of the country. Then we have skilling for the future, and how we have courses that are on green and care sector. Okay. So this is about our building our mega port right? Where we aim to have be able to handle up to 65 million standard-sized containers of cargo a year, and that would mean that the cranes have to be automated, and there's a lot of in fact, a lot of automation in the port equipment. And according to plan, 2022, we have launched this 20 billion facility to help us do that. Okay, and the airport as well. So we also envisage that there will be an increase in passenger travel to 135 million passengers. So we have also earmarked to build T5, so should be ready by mid-2030. Yeah, so this is how, if you look at our new Terminal 5, the roof is all covered by solar panels, and it's supposed to be fully sustainable. And okay, and let me wrap up with the third topic, which is how do we transform public organizations? We know that public organizations are the hardest to change and the last to go, right? Because there's so much vested interest in ensuring that they would keep what they have done. But in Singapore, we constantly actually review the relevance of our public research institutes, our public organizations. In fact, you'll find that new organizations get set up fairly quickly, and existing organizations, if their missions overlap, it's a matter of time that they'll be merged, right? So I give you some examples, right? So here we have this Ministry of Water, Energy and Water Resources that was set up a few decades ago. They just look at water and energy. However, with this sustainability COP26 and COP27, Community of Practice 26 to 27, that we had to set new carbon targets. We needed a ministry that is able to not just look at water and energy, but to look at Singapore as a whole. So what happened was that this whole ministry, this ministry was renamed and given a new mission to be renamed as the Ministry of Sustainability and Environment to give a bigger scope, and that actually helped to spearhead the blueprint for Singapore's sustainability roadmap for 2030. And likewise, I think for our food chain, right, so we are familiar with the way food is being produced. At a primary production, where you deal with the animals and the plants and the crops, we have one department that is under another ministry that's handling it. It's called the Primary Production Department in Aviary and Veterinary Services. And then after this, and then on the other hand, the import of the food, is being taken care of by another department, and these are taken care of by Health Services Authority. They will look at the safety of the food before they are allowed to be imported in Singapore. And then we have another group, another government agency called the National Environment Agency that will supervise the hygiene level and also the food handling practices of the restaurants, of the food SMEs. So with the whole food chain from farm to fork, actually being governed by 3 different government agencies, is very inefficient and is also very susceptible, to errors. So in 2019, because our food resilience program, food security goal that we wanted to achieve 30% of our food to be produced locally, 30 by 30, that means by 2030 we want to have 30% of the food to be produced locally. We set up a new agency called the Singapore Food Agency that is made up of incorporating all these 3 departments that I mentioned earlier that will look at it from end to end. And with that, we also set up not just the agency that was given the legitimacy to cover regulatory approval from end to end, from farm to fork, but we also set up a research institute called FRESH. FRESH is a future food ready research institute that look at the safety of novel food. Novel food comes in 4 areas. First is about plant-based proteins. Because of food resilience, we are also mentally prepared that should there be another pandemic, it is possible that other countries may not want to export food to us, right? So we need to have our own capabilities. So we look at plant-based meat. We are looking at culture meat as well, lab-grown meat, and we also look at insect protein, And also valorization. How do we extract side stream of, for instance, used barley, extracted barley from Milo to make into noodles. So there are a lot of innovative things that we're trying, but this is novel food. Novel food being defined as food that has not been consumed by a majority proportion of the population without any reported adverse health effects. So that would mean that we need to have an agency called FRESH that look at the food safety science from end to end again. Right. Now this is FRESH, which is an agency that I work with as well. So if you look at the whole process of culture meat, when you extract cells from the animal, stem cells and the muscle cells, and you put them in a bioreactor and given the necessary ingredients for the cell to grow, and then you let them proliferate, and then you make muscles out of them, and then after that you make them into burgers and whatever kind of meat you have. So the whole process is unknown, untested. No human has ever tried this before, and that is why we needed to make sure that it is safe, and we have that the agency to review and approve the process. So the companies wanting to sell this will have to submit their dossier of their the results to ensure that not just the food but the whole preparation process is safe for human consumption without any adverse health effects. Now for plant-based as well, this is plant-based process which will also need the regulatory approval. So what I mentioned about energy, the Ministry of Sustainability and Environment, new ministry being set up, and also the Singapore Food Agency are just examples to show you how there are no sacred cows in the public sector, meaning that any ministry that has outlived its usefulness can either be repurposed, or new ministries or new agencies can be formed to achieve the active role in the RIE 2020 strategic domain. Here we have got the domains here. Based on the role, based on the targets, the strategic targets, we can set up new organizations and have new laws enacted. And if you look at the frequency of that, from 2016 to 2017, 18, 19, 20, we have been very busy writing laws and setting up new agencies, right? Just to implement the policies, right? So, yes, time is up. Thank you for your attention. Yeah. So if you have any questions, maybe we can discuss now. Okay.
มีใครอยากจะถามคำถามอะไรนะครับ
สามารถที่จะยกมือถามได้เลยนะคะ มีไหมคะ ค่ะ ถ้าเกิดว่าไม่
มีคำถามอยู่ด้านหลัง
มีไหมคะ โอเค
ไมค์อยู่ด้านหลังครับครับผม
So thank you for your presentation. It's very interesting. So my question is, when you repurpose these like public organizations, so what do you do to change the mindset or to prepare your existing people for the change they are facing, right? Because some might be able to fit into the future, right? And some will find it very challenging.
Thank you. This is a very important, very great question. So before the change is actually effected, there would be reviews and actually foresight planning session and discourse as well that the ministry themselves will be involved in. In fact, the agency officers, could be the one actually looking at what is the future and how they think that their role can be changed. So giving them a sense of ownership and shaping what their future is certainly is part of the change management and the communication management that we can help to ease that transition. In fact, I think a lot of them are very excited about the new direction, the new goal. Yeah.
ครับผมมีคำถามอีกใช่ไหมครับโอเคครับ
เชิญค่ะ
It's very interesting about the culture meat. And in Singapore, maybe I think is the first nation in the world who commercialize this type of product. And I would like to ask about what the key factor and the key person who put the policy about the biotechnology, kind of technology like this, to be commercialized in Singapore.
Thank you for that question. Yes, we are the first to approve. The company that has come forward to submit their dossier for approval is Just Eat. So the company had to ensure that their dossier indicate that their preparation is safe and also the food doesn't give any side effect. So this is actually still very much driven by the private sector. But what the government, the public agency will do is to ensure that there are transparent, robust legislative framework in place that can point the interested private sector parties in the right direction so that they can get their R&D done and their food to be approved quickly and get to the market without compromising safety.
ค่ะมีท่านใดมีข้อสงสัยหรืออยากสอบถามเพิ่มเติมอีกไหมคะค่ะถ้าไม่มีแล้วนะคะก็ลำดับต่อไปค่ะดิฉันขอเรียนเชิญผู้ช่วยศาสตราจารย์ดร.รักพงษ์วงศาโรจน์ค่ะได้มอบของที่ระลึกแด่ท่านวิทยากรค่ะ
ครับผมแล้วก็เรียนเชิญถ่ายรูปร่วมกันสักเล็กน้อยนะครับผม